Hello, hello, hello. Hi. Hello. It is so wonderful to see so many faces when it's so dreary outside. It's like sunshine on the inside, but dreary on the outside. For the familiar faces who see me pretty often, hi, hello, welcome back. It's always wonderful to see you all. For the new faces, because there are quite a few new faces, my name is Kristen Santori. I'm the Programming and Communications Manager here at the church. Thank you for coming. Welcome to being here. We start off every program with a acknowledgement, and today it's very special because it is Indigenous Peoples Day. So I would like to invite you now to join me in an acknowledgement. And with gratitude, we acknowledge that we gather together today on the unceded land of the Montaukets, Manhassets, and Shinnecock nations, who are still here, who are a very prominent part of our community, and we are so grateful to be with them. So may the respect that we have for the ancestral spirit of this land, as well as each other, be what lead us forward. I'm going to give that a minute. I am extremely excited for this Wellness Monday program. For those of you who don't know, we have a core programming series here. So every month that we are open for exhibition, I get to work on Knowledge Friday, Wellness Monday, and Insight Sunday. And what that does is it reaches out to you guys. It reaches out to our community and brings you guys inside to share resources with our community. So it's really near and dear to my heart. And in addition to that, I was introduced to Joe by not one, but two people from this community. So like you guys, I really love learning. And so I'm super excited to have somebody who is an expert in this field, I would say. No, is not an expert in this field today. Got it. Well, he's gonna share much more knowledge than I could share, at least. So without further ado, Joe, thank you for being here, and welcome to Wellness Monday.
Great backdrop behind me. Those trees in the wind, right? And I do thank you for coming out today. But what else is there to do, really, than talk about psychedelics? And really, I really, what's the matter? Oh, I didn't turn it on? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I do consider myself a conduit. I don't really think there are any experts in psychedelics. I think there are people who know more. But they are major molecules and very mysterious molecules, and very hard to define and harness, which I think is one of their great things. So before we start, let's just have a show of hands. How many here would consider themselves infrequent flyers? And very well traveled? And psychedelically curious. Okay, great. Okay, good. I consider myself an infrequent flyer also. But we'll talk about that in a bit. So I want to just tell you why I wrote this book. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Brave New Weed, which was a narrative journey through what was then the new world of cannabis. And it was not a bestseller by any means, but it turned out to be a gateway book because about 5 years ago, friends of mine started asking me all sorts of questions like, oh, I want to do ayahuasca, but I have a heart condition. Is it a good idea? Or I'm microdosing, but I don't feel anything. Should I up my dose? And they went on and on and on and on. And I really didn't know the answers to all these questions. So I started looking around, and I found the internet sort of a vast wash of information, and you couldn't tell who knew a lot, who didn't know anything, what was good, what was bad, what was marketing. So I thought, well, maybe there is a time, maybe we're at this place now where so much science has been done and the world of spirit is coming back to the fore. Maybe it's time for a book like this. The other reason is that I'm a man of a certain age, as we probably all are here. And I was really afraid of getting old and ossified. I really think that flexibility, both in body and mind, are useful to people who are aging. And I happen to know from being a younger person that psychedelics they really work against the hardening of your categories. They are good for breaking habits and for, keeping yourself flexible. The third reason, I would say, is the rise of psychedelics in the last couple of years has been pretty big. 38% more people have used them since 2021. That's a lot. That's a big rise, okay? I mean, it's a small percentage of the population, but it's still a big rise, and yet we have no regulation. We have no real rules on how to use these things wisely or mindfully. So we are, and ultimately, look, we are the stewards of our own bodies. So I thought it was time for a book that actually laid out, here's the dosing, here's the risks, here's the way you use these things mindfully and a little more intelligently than certainly I was using them when I was a young person. The final reason is reading science is really tough. It's really dreary and very difficult. I almost think intentionally so. And reading a lot of spiritual books is also similarly difficult because it's all about me, my trauma, my problem, my this, my enlightenment, my revelations. And I find that equally difficult and tiresome. So I really wanted to toe the line between spirit and science in the writing of this book. You'll tell me if you think I succeeded. So I want to just give you first a little history lesson and then tell you what psychedelics are. So it's very interesting. These things have been around for a long time. MDMA was first discovered in 1912. It was discovered to control bleeding. It clearly didn't work for that. Mescaline was first synthesized in 1897. Mescaline is the ingredient of peyote, the active ingredient peyote. But it didn't really arouse a lot of interest. It was mostly a few artists and writers, and they were using it very philosophically, and it went away. Ibogaine. Does anybody here not know what ibogaine is? Ibogaine is a plant, comes from West Africa, the country of Gabon and Cameroon, and it's an extraordinary plant, which I'll talk about in a bit time. It was first isolated and discovered in 1901, and then in the 30s, from 1930 to 1967, was sold in France as a, quote, stimulating tonic. You could just buy it in the grocery store. The classic is LSD, of course. It was synthesized by a man named Albert Hofmann in 1938. He was a meticulous Swiss chemist. Was also trying to stop bleeding, I believe. It didn't work. He put it on the shelf. And 5 years later, he woke up one day and just had a particular intuition to resynthesize LSD-25. And as he was working, a little bit, we think, either touched his skin or got into the oculent tissue of his eye. And within a half hour, he was having the world's first acid trip. And of course, he had no idea what was happening. But he did know that the people in the lab in their white coats and in all that machinery scared him. So I'm going to condense the story. He got on a bicycle. His assistant, Susie, followed him home. He went home. He called the doctor. He thought he was dying. He called the doctor. The doctor came and said, hey, your heart rate's fine, your lungs are breathing well. The only difference is your eyes are dilated. He endured it for a few more hours, and then suddenly it was pretty pleasant. And he woke up the next day, and the world was shimmering. Colors were bright. He heard bird song. He felt clear. And he went back to Sandoz. Sandoz is today Novartis. He went back to Sandoz and said, hey, I discovered something really weird. I think people in the office should try it. And they did. Other people and researchers at Sandoz tried it, and they all knew that they had a really special molecule on their hand. They just didn't know what to do with it. And what they did is also, this is so trippy. For the next 20 years, they gave it to researchers, psychiatrists, psychologists to use for their patients and on their own. They just sent it for free. It was free. You wrote in, you could get Sandoz LSD. And over 1,000 papers were published on LSD. LSD is one of the most researched psychedelics in the history of the world. 1,000 papers. The problem was they didn't understand dosing and they didn't understand guidelines. So many people reported that their patients were having bad trips, but they would do things like strap them to an operating table, shine really bright lights into their eyes for 10 hours, and give them a huge dose of 1,000 micrograms, which is 10 times an average dose today. Yeah, they had a bad trip. Yeah. Other researchers discovered, though, this is very interesting, that the right dose could really help with anxiety. It could stop hardcore drinkers from drinking. Bill W., who started AA, used LSD and actually went to the board of AA and said, we should use this. Needless to say, they threw him off the board, but he continued using it on his own. It was also discovered that it is the only thing that cures cluster headaches, which are also called suicide headaches, because the pain is so great and endures for so long that people kill themselves. We also learned at that time that they created quote-unquote mystical experiences. Now, researchers knew that this was happening, but they didn't like to report it. It doesn't really fit scientific journals. But it was of great interest to some, and it's of particular interest to me as well. So as we all know, in the 1960s, with Timothy Leary and Ken Kesey, they were sort of unleashed without control. It was tune in, turn on, drop out. And that was really interesting and really good for lots of people. And it was also really bad because people did not understand basic concepts of how to use psychedelics. And there were some scary reports and overdosing, and they were mixed with other things. This is another very interesting story that I'm not going to talk about. I'm just going to give you a quickie. And then in 1967, Richard Nixon instituted prohibition. Now, prohibition never stopped use. The latest study was that 33 million Americans consider themselves psychedelic users. That's a pretty large amount of number, 33 million out of whatever. That's about 10% of the population, really, right? But what it did stop was research and knowledge from being widely transmitted. And it happened to me, too. I used psychedelics when I was in college. I went to school at Northwestern in Chicago, and it was an enormous hub of MDMA and LSD distribution. So it was very accessible. But then in the 1970s, we started seeing these ads on TV. Anybody remember the egg frying being cracked into the frying pan? This is your brain on drugs. That was really good that was really effective advertising, right? So I sort of pulled back a bit as well. And the underground continued the movement going forward. I would say the second wave of psychedelics began, unofficially it began in 1962 when a man named Alexander Shulgin, who was a brilliant chemist at Dow Chemicals, he invented an insecticide. And this insecticide was very, very effective. And at Dow at the time, if you did something that made them a lot of money, they gave you a $1 bill and said, hey, go do whatever you want. And he had had a mescaline journey that year and decided he was going to invent and synthesize psychedelic drugs. And this is amazing because he has a farm in Lafayette, California, and he had it, he died. And on that farm, he synthesized over 240 novel compounds, many of which are in circulation today. As a matter of fact, he resynthesized MDMA and came up with a much quicker, faster way of resynthesizing it, and that was in the 1970s. And sure enough, so he and his wife and his friends would have these Friday night gatherings. He would invent a new chemical, they would try it. The deal was they had to mark their observations about it, what was good, what was bad, how they felt, side effects, blah, blah, blah. Well, MDMA was a big, almost immediate hit. And he started giving it to a group of therapists, his friends. And about 150 therapists were using MDMA in couples therapy in the 1970s. The word about town was 1 5-hour MDMA journey was the equivalent of 1 year in couples counseling. I believe it. They called it ADAM, A-D-A-M. They moved the letters around to keep it quiet. They didn't want the information to leak out because they knew what the government would do. They knew they would try to ban it, but sorry, it didn't work. It got out into the club scene. Another amazing story is this tennis pro in Dallas tried MDMA, loved it, and thought, okay, I'm going to raise money to produce and distribute this. This is why he came to Chicago in the 1970s and 80s. And he raised a fund, and they had a production facility in Dallas, and they had an 800 number. You wanted MDMA? Call the 800 number, okay? And it was sent to you. Extraordinary story. Of course, Alexander, and the other thing I have to tell you about Alexander Shulgin is he was such a well-regarded chemist that he operated in full compliance with the law. He had a DEA license to make these substances. Extraordinary, right? And when MDMA was banned by the feds in 1987, he decided he was going to take his revenge. And he wrote a book called PiCal, which is phenylethylamines I've known and loved. And in this book, it's like this thick, it's 900 pages. He writes this story of him and his wife, all fictionalized, and their friends, and going through all these things. But in the end of the book, he gives you the recipes of all of these phenylethylamines that he created. So he began an underground movement. Now, that book was published for 3 years without the DEA knowing it. So it became the cookbook for every underground chemist around the world. And that's how this stuff kept going. Interestingly enough, the DEA attempted to bust him several years later once they learned about this book. And they trampled his peyote garden. He had this lab on his property, and he was growing peyote on the pathway. And peyote takes 20 years to grow. It's a very slow-growing plant. He was so pissed off with them for trampling his garden, he wrote another book, TiCal, which was a whole set of other compounds in which MDMA is included, that he published again. And that became the second recipe and the second cookbook that kept all of these formulas going underground for a very long time. I would say the third phase began in the 1990s when a researcher, I think at the University of New Mexico at the time, Rick Strassman, this man is more diligent than anyone I know. He spent 3 years lobbying the DEA to allow him to test DMT on people. And he finally got through that bureaucratic red tape and tested many, many people with DMT and wrote a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And that really launched a huge wave of interest. And the second part of that was another chemist researcher called Roland Griffiths. He was at Johns Hopkins. He was a heavyweight. He was an official, straight-laced guy. He was the one that got caffeine listed as an addictive substance. And he decided, he was a meditator also, Vipassana. He decided he wanted to test psilocybin, the active ingredient in mushrooms, on people. And in 2000, he began studies with psilocybin and people with end of life. The FDA allowed that because really end of life, not much to lose. That's how they looked at it. But they had extraordinary results. Most people in those studies said it was among the 5 most powerful experiences of their lives. It helped to quell their anxiety in a huge way. It made death much more acceptable to them. One woman, I was very moved by this, one woman who was an atheist said, "It was the closest to God I've ever come." And the researcher said, "Well, what does God feel like if you're an atheist?" And she said, "Well, it's like a mother's love for her child." And that is a very powerful description of an experience on a psychedelic. At the time, psychedelics were not looked on positively by research. Like, you didn't really talk about it. It was sort of considered a career killer at the time. But now Harvard, Imperial College, University of San Francisco, NYU, UCLA, Columbia, you name it, are all doing psychedelic studies. It's now, you don't talk about it because you don't want the patent you're working on to be discovered. And that's really why I called the book Modern Psychedelics, because we're at a time now with this confluence of neuroscience and the clinical studies, which are really revealing interesting but very similar results, which we'll talk about. And the information of wise hippies is now coming. People are really looking at them with much more respect. And I think also indigenous people's wisdom has had a resurgence. People in the psychedelic movement are very concerned about not just taking. They want to give back now. And that's a good time, really. One thing I'll tell you, which I do find a little optimistic, is that psychedelic development has paralleled cataclysmic times in history. So LSD, 1942, World War II. The psychedelic revolution in the 1960s, the Vietnam War, and huge social unrest. I guess we can fill in the blank about today. Okay? Sort of interesting to think about. I've learned a few things along the way about better journeys, how to have more meaning and maybe a little more fun, depending on how you use these things and what your interests are. So I first want to just tell you, I want to talk about what are psychedelics. So there's the 9 ones that I look at in my book are LSD, mescaline peyote, DMT, another thing called 5-MeO DMT, which comes from a frog. Anybody know about this one? Also called bufo. All right, this is also very psychedelic. How do you get bufo? You catch a Sonoran desert frog, which is like this. It's a big, ugly frog. You know about it.
Well, you lick it?
No, you don't lick it. That's a great, wonderful myth. I love that one. No, you cannot eat DMT. You cannot put through the stomach. It kills it immediately unless it's mixed with another substance. No, you catch the frog, which only comes out in the rain in the Sonoran desert, which means 1 month a year. Then you squeeze its partotid gland, which is on its back. There's 2 of them. And then you grab that liquid and you dry it on a plate or a piece of glass, and then you smoke it. So who figured that out? Okay? Tell me about that one, all right? That's a good one. What are the other ones? So LSD, mushrooms, mescaline, the DMTs. There's one more. Iboga from the plant in West Africa. No, that's not one. Sorry, take it back. No, ketamine is a classic. It's called a dissociative anesthetic. It was discovered in 1962, and all soldiers in the Vietnam War carried 2 injectable syringes in their uniform, full of ketamine. If your buddy, it was called the buddy drug. If your buddy got hit by a bullet or a bomb or stepped on a grenade, you immediately injected him with this very safe anesthetic. It did not stop the heart rate, didn't lower the lungs beat rate, and he would be pain-free for about an hour so he could get medevaced. That's how safe ketamine is, okay, despite what Elon will tell you. In high doses, ketamine is extremely psychedelic. You see a lot of hallucinations. MDMA is an entactogen or empathogen. It increases feelings of closeness and empathy with the world and usually the person you're using it with. And then there is ibogaine, which is called an oneirogen. It creates a dream state almost. Uses works on a completely different set of receptors. It reportedly, and I know many people who say this, stops addiction and relapse in 1 dose. Nothing in the world does that. The state of Texas, the red state of Texas, 2 months ago, gave $50 million to study it for use in addiction and in traumatic brain injury in veterans. That is a powerful, powerful substance. The journey lasts for something between 12 and 36 hours. In Africa, where they use it, the journey's sometimes 5 days long. That's a long trip, right? Okay, so psychedelics, completely unique. The word drugs it speaks more to the impoverishment of our language than it does to these compounds, okay? There's no other substance like a psychedelic. They are not like pharmaceuticals. They don't act the same way every time. They are predictably unpredictable. And this is really interesting. They're cross-diagnostic. So at first they thought, oh, psilocybin, that's good for depression. Oh, MDMA, that's good for addiction. This one, oh, that's good for trauma. But as the research has continued, we have learned that they all work on similar illnesses: PTSD, chronic depression, end-of-life anxiety, addiction to alcohol, opioids, tobacco, even cell phones. It's going to be a very, very big use, I promise you. And traumatic brain injury. They have different subjective effects, which means they don't all feel the same. They feel quite different. So psilocybin is generally considered warmer than LSD, which is considered bitchier. DMT is a lot of visuals, very many visuals. 5-MeO DMT, that frog, it's a whiteout. It's an extraordinary experience. It's called an end-of-life experience. I thought that would be a scary thing. I've used it a couple of times, and it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced, really. So they have different subjective effects, but what they do have in common is they all enable new connections in the brain, in the mind, and between people. Not always in that moment. And therapeutically, 1 or 2 doses, the effects can last for months, sometimes years, and sometimes that's it, one and done. And there's no other medicine, especially with these illnesses that I just listed, that do that. They are not addictive, despite what the DEA or the federal government will tell you. They are not drugs of abuse. Now, low-dose ketamine may be the exception because it's now it's a white powder, it's a party drug, it's easy to use. And if you use a lot, it can really screw up your bladder, as Elon told us. But unlike cocaine, like if you give monkeys cocaine, they keep tapping that bar. They want more cocaine. Psychedelics aren't like that. They're self-limiting. And anybody who's used them knows for its fact. You trip one day, you're not going back for more the next day. You're pretty full for a long time. And there is a reason for that we'll come to. They're not an escape from reality. I think they can offer insights. I think they may make returning to ordinary life a little less ordinary. But if you want an escape from reality, you should just work on changing your reality, because psychedelics aren't going to do that. And they've also been misunderstood for centuries. And this is really interesting. So, in indigenous culture, the curandero, the healer, would say, okay, you're getting this much, you're getting this much, and you're getting that much. And that drove the worldview of this entire group of people, these indigenous tribes. And rather than upsetting or upending the social order, it reinforced the social order. This is how we do it. They were used ritually as huge rites of passage. And of course, they never used laws to control drugs, the exact opposite. Their rituals controlled the use. And that's a really interesting difference. And if you look at the 1960s, you can see the difference very clearly. It was quite chaotic. We had to have government and laws, and the rituals that have been developed underground. And I think we still need more rituals, actually, to really help us manage these big experiences in our lives. They are all disruptors, and people who use them understand that, and the people who are in control of them really fear it. And that's still the case, I think, today, clearly. And they are called non-specific amplifiers. They amplify what's going on in the mind. They're usually not importing new things. That's also, hold on to that thought, because I'm going to come back for it. I also want to say, look, this talk was called Psychedelics for Healing and Health. And I think health is different from healing, right? I think health is more than treating a sickness. Health can be about getting out of a rut or a creative rut. It can be about seeing your problems in new ways, changing habits that are really encoded and deeply enforced. And I said this before, I think psychedelics can be used for joy and connection and fun, and you see that at raves a lot. And they're sort of effervescent collective experiences if you've ever been to anything like that. And yes, they are well known, many of them, to create mystical experiences. Has anybody here ever experienced a mystical experience on a psychedelic? Here's how you define a mystical. So mystical experience was first defined in the 1890s by an American philosopher, William James. He was Henry James's brother. He was a brilliant man. Here's how he defines it. And if you take any trial, you're going to get something called an MEQ, which is a mystical experience questionnaire that you have to fill out 1 million of, the more you take. All right, but a sense of the sacred, knowing that you have met the source of all being. Some people might call that God. A noetic quality, which is that this experience is imbued with a meaning that is true beyond question. A deep joy or a blessedness, a tranquility, an awe, and an ineffability. It's very hard to describe these things in words. And it's sort of what makes all those spiritual books a little boring, too. And paradox. You are able to accept the coexistence of mutually exclusive states. I love that. It's both and, not only either or. And there's a unitary consciousness. It blurs the boundaries between me and you, self and object, self and other. We sort of understand that we are the same as these trees blowing in the wind, which is also the same as us going on. And that's really interesting. There was a study done in 2015 with 25 clergy people from all different religious backgrounds, Hindi, Buddhist, mostly Christian, Jewish, other random ones within there. Okay, of those 25 clergy people, 2 had an experience they did not rate as great. They thought it was difficult, demanding, dark. Everybody else had what they considered a very beautiful experience. 3 of them, however, were inspired to quit their own order and open their own psychedelic churches. And the reason, they said, is because psychedelics gave them a more direct experience of God. Quite interesting. There are people who should not be experimenting with psychedelics very liberally. They are schizophrenic, bipolar. Even if you've had a history of mental illness in your family, you should probably be very cautious. They always say talk to your doctor, but I have found that most doctors know nothing about psychedelics, so that is really lame advice. I mean, it's sort of a decision you have to have with someone you trust and yourself ultimately. And importantly, and I think this is super important, they don't impose a burden on anyone else. They are also not the only way to go. You can pray, you can meditate, you can take a walk in the woods, you can sit in silence. And I think all of those experiences are, good things to think about, depending on what you're looking for. All right, so today, here we are. Who here has read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind? It's a really good book. It's insightful, it's deep, it's well written. He's a really brilliant guy, I'm sure. He's a brilliant writer. However, Michael had sort of a bromance with one researcher, a guy named Robin Carhart Harris, who was at the Imperial College in London and who's now heads the Department of Psychedelic Studies at University of San Francisco. And he did a lot of research by putting people in fMRI machines and then studying the blood flow and where that blood went in different areas of the brain, if you remember, right? And it said, okay, so different regions that don't normally talk to each other start talking, and all these different things happen, and you could see all these pretty diagrams and pretty colors. They lit up different brain regions. It was all very, very exciting. Lots of graphs, lots of colors. And you would hear things like, MDMA lowers the fear response, which is controlled by the amygdala. And experts talk like this all the time. I mean, I'll say it because it's sort of an easy shorthand, but it isn't really true. Because fMR is really only measuring blood flow to the brain. It is not measuring neural activity. All right? And other neuroscientists feel that it's trying to look at, say, like a traffic jam in New York from Saturn through a bunch of clouds. Like it's not an accurate representation. So this idea was made super clear by a female researcher named Gül Dölen. She's Turkish-American. She used to work at Johns Hopkins. She now is at Berkeley. And she had this idea to give octopuses ecstasy. Anybody hear about these studies? Makes a great headline, Octopuses on Ecstasy, okay? So what she first started doing is, she works with animals. That's what she does. She first gave them a high dose of ecstasy, and they were sort of stood like this, all 8 arms, very stiff in the tank. And then she lowered the dose to what we would take, and something super interesting happened. Octopuses are not nice creatures. They're extremely aggressive. And, okay, I know you all saw My Octopus Teacher, but that's not how they are, okay? They're not that cuddly, all right? And they tend to attack each other. What happened, though, she gave them the MDMA, and the octopuses actually broke through a barrier in the tank and started cuddling with another octopus who was hiding underneath a flower pot. And that was and their arms started doing these like ballerina dances. They actually called it the ballerina dose. So that's really interesting because the octopus brain has nothing to do with the human brain. The ancestor, it's like 650 million years old. It's more like a slug. It doesn't have an amygdala. It doesn't have nucleus accumbens. It doesn't have a prefrontal cortex. These are the areas of the brains that all of these fMRI studies are telling you get all lit up and excited, okay? The octopus brain predates a dinosaur. So something else was going on. Like there's these anatomical things, they're happening, but what's the source of it? So being a very advanced neuroscientist, I mean, her biography is unbelievable. I'm going to post a talk I did with her 2 weeks ago on my Substack in a couple of weeks. My Substack is called Modern Psychedelics. It gives you a more lateral, I'm doing other things that are in the book, okay? She is just extraordinary. She's able to take this very advanced form of cellular research and look deep into the cell and see that there is a molecular change happening in the cells of these brains, okay? And her research suggested that psychedelics are opening what's called a social critical period of learning. Does anybody know what a critical period is? It's a very obscure but very well reported fact. It's when the brain is able to absorb a massive amount of information but a limited period of time. For a very limited period of time. So a guy named Konrad Lorenz discovered them in 1935. He discovered that goslings, little geese, just shortly after, 48 hours after they're hatched, are following their mother around, imprinting, that was what it was called, imprinting all their mother's behavior. They learned how to eat, they learned how to squawk, they learned how to follow other geese, they learned how to fly. After 48 hours, that critical period of learning stopped. So if you didn't catch it then, you probably weren't going to make it. And what they've discovered since then is neuroscientists have discovered that we all have critical periods, many, many, many of them. There's a critical period for learning language, which is from being 2 to 5, really, which is why all those of us who are adults really struggle to learn a second or a third language, and why we'll never get the accent right. But think about it, like those little kids who were raised bilingually, instant, right? And they can hear the subtle differences of tone. There's critical periods of visual learning. Like if you're born with cataracts and your visual period, which is like early on in life, is not opened, you will never see again, even if those cataracts are removed. It's really fascinating. These are deep molecular changes in the brain that happens. Anyway, so she discovered what is now known as a social critical period of learning. And that applies to humans also. One of the theories is that adolescents have a critical period of social learning. And that's why they're so bonded. And that's why they have to be with each other and follow each other and copy each other. They're learning the norms of their group. Quite interesting. So she did a second experiment. That was one experiment. The second experiment which was with rats. Now rats, old rats as a matter of fact, and old rats are sort of like old people. They're sort of grouchy. They don't really like a lot of social interaction. And first she gave some grumpy rats MDMA, and guess what? They started cuddling with younger mice. And that was super unusual. And of course the headline was, okay, MDMA teaches old rats new tricks. And at first they thought, okay, this is this big mouse party, a big mouse rave going on. But there was something, one of her researchers in her lab said, wait a second, I want to look at this further. And they gave the rats every psychedelic. They gave them LSD, ibogaine, ketamine, and psilocybin. And as we know, most of those drugs are not warm and cuddly drugs. LSD, ibogaine, maybe ketamine, but not really, okay? They're not social. But the same thing happened. The old rats started bonding and cuddling again. And when they looked into the brains, they saw that every psychedelic had opened a critical period. And that was a groundbreaking discovery. Because what this suggests is what it's like to be in the altered state of consciousness that psychedelics induce is what it feels like to be in a critical period. And if anybody who's journeyed here, they know there's lots of stuff happen during a trip. It's visual, there's insights, there's bad memories, good memories. It's a lot more than trippy colors and walls pulsating and fractals, okay? You may be experiencing what it's like to be in a critical period. And then the third experiment they did is they showed that the opening of the critical period was proportional with the length of the journey that every psychedelic induced. So, ketamine, short journey, half hour to an hour, depending on what you're doing. Critical period of learning, 4 days, maybe a week. Psilocybin, 5 hours, critical period of learning, 2 weeks. LSD, peyote, longer journeys, 10 hours, critical period, 3 weeks. Ibogaine, which has this super long journey, they haven't figured out the end of it. They think it's 4 weeks. And that's one reason they think that ibogaine is so powerful at interrupting addiction. So let me just stress this. A critical period opens the brain to new learning, okay? It's just opening it to new learning. So what you learn, and this is where it gets really interesting, is super dependent on how you prepare for these journeys and what you do in the follow-up. In the 60s, it was called set and setting, is where your mindset and where you're journeying, and the integration period afterwards. And this is very, very, very different than the biochemical or the biochemical model that the old studies are purporting, and which you'll still hear a lot about today, okay? The old studies are basically saying, look, psychedelics, they're like another level of SSRI, Lexapro or whatever those SRIs are called, right? We're going to take the trip out, and this is happening a lot in the research labs now. We're going to get rid of the trip, and we're just going to mess around with the serotonin, and that's going to change the way people behave. The learning model that these rat and octopus studies suggest completely different model, okay? It's not one pill a day for the rest of your life. We're going to prepare you. The preparation sort of gets the mind working. So some people say that before you do psychedelics, if you're working on like a deep thing like TBI, traumatic brain injury, or addiction, you want a long time to prepare. You want to think about the memories associated with these deep experiences, right? Because you built a lot of behavior, a lot of thinking, a lot of habit around them, and that's what enforces them. So they'll spend days or weeks in preparation, integration setups, right? Preparatory setups. They'll have the journey, and then the integration will follow, usually for several weeks. And by the way, the hippies, Timothy Leary knew this. It wasn't quite as formalized as this, but he knew that how you prepared for the journey would really make a difference as to what happened in the journey. He called it arranging the inputs. That's quite fascinating. So the idea is, and also if you look at indigenous cultures, like if you look at people who are using ayahuasca in a ritual way, they will isolate often for days or weeks before their journey. They will have a specific diet, which they avoid, spicy foods and porks and different elements. No sex, not with others or with yourself, and no alcohol. That's part of the indigenous preparation. So these things are starting to, as we look more closely, they're starting to parallel, and that's really interesting. So a little more depth on how this might work is, you do your prep, and then your journey is like your Alice in Wonderland moment. You're going through the rabbit hole of your mind, right? And that's where you're going to find old memories. And the emotions that they're associated with, right? In the integration period, you get to learn new things. And the idea is that paired with therapy, the initial research is showing that 50% of people who use psychedelics paired with therapy, that's super important, this is just not tripping, 50% have a breakthrough. I'm able to understand the source of my self-loathing. I understand the source of my depression or my addiction. I can reappraise the trauma associated with my rape without the same emotional response. They're actually able to dig themselves out of that. It's not necessarily one and done. They may have to come back and journey more. But that's an amazing thing. Science has been, the last 40 years of psychiatry have been unable to give us anything that help with these sorts of illnesses. Nothing. So I think we can all benefit from these sorts of lessons, whether we're dealing with trauma or whether we want to use psychedelics on our own, which is, okay, let's think about how we prepare for a journey. Maybe we just don't want to take acid and go to a concert surrounded by 30,000 other people. Maybe there's another way to do it. I mean, look, we're all of a certain age, right? We may not want to do it in the same way we did it when we were 20. Just think about it, okay? And maybe you spend time, days, couple of days, weeks, thinking about what it is you want to think about or what you want to work on in your life. Maybe you meditate. Maybe if you pray, or maybe you write. Writing is very useful at activating memories and associations. And I'll tell you one thing. So I did a retreat in Jamaica 2 years ago. And this was exquisite. It was beautifully done. I knew that I had exchanged some of my consulting work for this trip, okay? It was first class all the way in the South Shore of Jamaica, very private, very beautiful. It was like being in Greece. This is just what you wanted, okay? And I did 3 preparation sessions that were both talking and looking at pictures, really trying to plumb what I was trying to get at. And you arrive in Jamaica, and the sea is there, and it's gorgeous and beautiful, and it fucking happened on October 7th of 2023, which was the day Hamas invaded Israel. We're at a sort of anniversary moment here, okay? And I was obsessed. I was in my gorgeous room reading my phone. I couldn't stop scrolling, reading the headlines. I had a lot of time in Israel as a result of being a kid and working on a kibbutz when I was younger and traveling, and also when I was writing Brave New Weed. That was the capital of cannabis research. I have a lot of friends in Israel. I felt really terrible for those people at the rave who were tripping and getting shot at by our machine guns. And I also felt like this is not going to end well. And that journey, that first night, boy, I'll tell you, I did all those preparation ceremonies, I did all of that work, and all I could see was destruction and cataclysm and despair, and I had to call the guides and get up and talk to them and leave the room. And it was a terrible, terrible, magnified evening, which I just saw cataclysm and fire all around me. So I really believe you have to control your inputs. I mean, I've had that experience personally, and it's powerful. Very powerful thing that happens. And then, so you do your trip, and then after the trip, I think we're going to see this, when that critical period is open, really honor it. Really try to retain as much as you can the images, the sensations, the thoughts, the feelings, the associations that come up in that journey. Meditate on them, write about them, talk to them with your friends or your lovers or integration circles. Integration circles are really big on the West Coast. These are people who come together after their journeys and for like 6 or 8 weeks, maybe even longer, and talk together and sort of go through what happened and try to make meaning. We are meaning-making creatures. That is why we're around. Basically, we try to make meaning out of our experiences. Very important. There's also research that shows that if you journal 20 minutes a day, not more, 20 minutes a day, after 20 minutes, it becomes rumination and very self-rotating stuff, that you can really capture a lot of stuff from these journeys, okay? That's really interesting. There you go. Prime the brain, do the trip, integrate. Try to get the meaning from the journeys. It's the integration that'll help you enable let's call it the cognitive reappraisal, and that you can visit memories and feelings and separate them and try to understand them differently. The next big test of this critical period learning is going to happen later this year in humans. And this is the money shot, okay? So what they're going to do is people who have strokes have a limited period after the stroke. Their critical period is open to relearning motor movement, and that critical period is 60 days, and I think language is 90 to 120 days, okay? But after that, the critical period closes, and if you don't regain that movement, you've lost it. It's gone. You know this, right? You know people who've had strokes, right? It can be very, very debilitating. So what they're going to try to do is, with people who've had strokes for over a year ago, give them psilocybin, and they have a virtual reality video game that they've created where you move your arm in 3 dimensions all around a screen. And they're going to test if the psychedelic reopens the critical period of motor learning. And that work will be done at Johns Hopkins starting later this year or early next year. And that will really tell us how true this molecular understanding of psychedelics is. And that is really fascinating. And that is, you got to give this researcher credit because she's just going for it. She doesn't want to waste any more time. Rats, great. Octopus is fantastic. Humans is where it matters, right? Pregnant pause. Okay, now I want to talk about microdosing, because I think a lot of us here are probably really interested in microdosing, and it's a really fascinating experience. So I just talked to you a lot about big doses, okay? Now, remember all that, retain it, but microdosing is a completely different animal, okay? I told you psychedelics are not like other drugs. You don't lower the dose and have a trip light, okay? So, microdosing, same chemical, hugely different experience based on dose, okay? And again, at a certain age, it's sort of a nice thing. You don't really need to blast out of the earth to have a powerful experience. People are microdosing with LSD, psilocybin, and ibogaine now. They're starting to microdose with ibogaine, which is a whole different ballgame. What it is, it's 1/10 of a standard dose. So with LSD, that is 10 micrograms of LSD. With psilocybin, it's 15 milligrams. It's a sub-threshold dose. If you take this dose and the screen is getting wavy or the walls are starting to pulse, you've taken too much. That's not what it is. You're under the perceptual threshold. And you dilute it. With LSD, you dilute 1 tab of LSD in 10 tablespoons of water, and you take it every 3 days. Psilocybin, you can follow that protocol as a slightly different protocol. But it's all in my book, all the information. And it's also very hard to study microdosing. It's, first of all, giving people illegal drugs and say, go home and take them, it's hard. That's not standard operating procedure. And if you're using psilocybin, it's also hard because mushrooms grow in the ground, and there are very different varieties of mushrooms with different strengths, and there's really no way to, know the exact dosage. They have different other things in them, different nutrients, different chemicals. So it's hard to standardize. But it's not impossible, it's just difficult. And here's another problem with studying them. Okay, so Nature is the #1 scientific journal in the world. Okay? If you're in Nature, you're really good. They published, in 2022, they published 2 microdosing studies within months of each other. The first one found absolutely no evidence to support enhanced well-being, enhanced creativity, or enhanced cognitive function. All bullshit, all expectancy effects, also known as placebo effects. The second study, which came out 2 months later, found small to medium-sized improvements in mood and mental health across gender and age. Same journal, same topic, completely different results. Okay, so I don't think studying is the only way we can understand microdosing. And if you use Reddit, you will also agree with me, because on the subreddit, microdosing, are 250,000 people reporting what their experience is from microdosing. We have counted over 32 conditions they say it helps. They include ADHD, depression, anxiety, neuropathy, quitting smoking, even stuttering. They also say it's additive. It's not only stopping things, it increases mindfulness, the ability to connect with the present moment rather than being stuck in the past or worrying about the future. I love this one. Improved memory and cognition, improved motor skills, greater interconnection with people. Now, there's a warning here. Self-reported studies are biased. People who have good effects, self-report. People who have no effects tend not to, right? They just don't bother. So I'm an N of 1. I've been microdosing for 5 years. Well, I'll tell you about that in a second. I love microdosing. There's another study that was started by Paul Stamets. Does anybody know who Paul Stamets is? I know, Oliver, you know who he is. Paul Stamets is like Mr. Mycology. He's an extraordinary guy. He's a mycologist. He loves mushrooms. He travels the world studying mushrooms, both psilocybin mushrooms and every other variety. And he has found glyphs of mushrooms in caves of Egypt. He has done incredible things. He also has a company called Host Defense. He makes all those adaptogenic mushrooms with lion's mane and cordyceps and does all sorts of studies on them. He's really a great guy. He started what's called the microdose.me study. This is an online study. Right now they have 24,000 users, and it's studying cognitive performance and mental health. Those 24 have reported reductions, statistically significant reductions in depression and trauma and improvements in mood. They also have a thing called a TAP test. This is really important, okay? TAP test. It tests your cognitive ability to control your motor skills. So what you do is you're tapping on a screen at certain rhythms, okay? Now, that sounds like a sort of small thing, but it's actually a huge thing because it sort of takes 6 different brain regions to tap like this rhythmically, okay? And they have found the greatest results were seen in people over 55. And that's really important because motor skill tends to decline as you age, okay? And what I have to stress here, this is not about a feeling. This is a physical response, okay? Cognitive ability over motor skills. And if you think it's small, it's the same thing as playing the piano, learning the trombone, walking into the bathroom over 80 and not falling down. That's impressive. So they did the first study and they want to replicate it, which is how we do it in science, how they do it in science. And the researcher, the lead researcher who comes from the University of British Columbia, he is not part of the study at all. He says that slow tapping is a solid index of psychomotor ability, which is an early indicator of cognitive decline, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. It's not a diagnosis, but it's not irrelevant. It's a marker. That's pretty fascinating. That's really worth thinking about. So as I told you, I've been microdosing for 5 years, and it is a hard thing to define. What I've come up with is that it works like aspirin. It doesn't really call attention to itself. And at first I wrote, it's not dramatic. And then I thought about that, and I thought, wait a second, it is dramatic, but you just don't notice it until one day you wake up and say, hey, wait, I feel pretty good. Oh, wait, I wanted to get to my desk in the morning. Oh, wait, I had a rough day, and I'm still smiling. So I think for me, and remember, I'm N of 1 here. I'm not a clinical study, but I would say it makes me feel better about almost everything. At the same time, here's that and, not either or, but and. It's not a happy pill, but it does seem to address the underlying conditions of happiness. And I can't explain it better. To tell you it's a bump up in motivation, it's a little more energy. I should have really dedicated my book to microdosing because it made it a lot easier and staved off some of the anxiety of trying to condense 80 years of research and translating neuroscience into readable English. So that is the one regret I have about writing this book. But the other thing I have to say is I also think it causes you to feel more of everything. So that could include some painful emotions like sadness, fear, or anxiety. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who is sort of anxious, and she tried microdosing and gave up pretty quickly. It was just making it more. So you have to be prepared to grapple with an expanded spectrum of emotion, and it might not be for you. But as I said, the formulas for trying it are in my book. You can feel free to give it a try if you have access to stuff. And if you have some questions or comments, let's talk now. Okay. Done. I saw the blonde woman hand first.
tried it, but I had read that there were some issues with the heart.
With what?
With your heart. It's called,
Tachycardia?
no, theoretical risk of cardiac fibrosis and valvular heart disease.
Maybe.
So that's why I stopped.
You're taking 1/10 a dose of a I don't want to,
Yeah.
look, I'm not going to tell you to do anything.
I'd rather
okay?
go on the trip.
One dose of a substance that has no real effect on the heart except for the first few minutes of a journey. And I have to say this, we've never seen emergency rooms filled with people who are having heart conditions from taking LSD or mushrooms. And we would have seen that by now. You're not doing it every day, you're doing it every 3 days. And the theory is you take it the first day, which may cause a slight uptick in sensation. The second day is generally neutral, and the third day is back to baseline. And you do that for 6 to 8 weeks, and then you stop. But let's be really serious here, okay, just for a second. People have been using psychedelics underground for over 65 years without guidance. We have never, that is the largest trial of any substances ever known to man. 60 years. We have never seen an uptick in emergency room visits. We've never seen an uptick in deaths known to psychedelics, okay? It's quite fascinating. And there's never been any indication that heart disease is amplified by psychedelics. Again, I'm not a specialist. I cannot tell you to do this automatically. I think we would know by now, especially when we have things like the FDA and the DEA and all these agencies trying to find the negative effects of these substances. Where are they? They would be reported by now. You had a question, yes. Well, wait for the mic, please.
Oh, goodness. Could you speak specifically about the differences between microdosing with ketamine and microdosing with LSD?
Oh, I don't know anybody who would microdose with ketamine. I don't think it would be much of an anything, really. I mean, again, we're talking 1/10. What is the dose we're microdosing from? Are we talking about a psychedelic dose or a club dose, right? You know how people use ketamine in clubs today? Yes, there is, but they're not, it's not the same. Ketamine for depression is usually used intravenously or intramuscularly or intranasally, and it's a high dose. It's a very different sort of substance. I don't know anyone I've never read anything about microdosing ketamine. Ketamine is it's a dissociative. It separates you in a way from your body so that you have thoughts. And this is how they think it works for depression. You're able to sort of get some distance between your rigid habitual thinking and reality. So it's a very interesting, they don't really, nobody understands how these things, let me be very clear, no one understands how psychedelics work, okay? And ketamine is extremely mysterious on how it's working. We don't know. But we do know that it's effective for depression, for anxiety, for lots of the same sort of mental illnesses that the other psychedelics seem to treat. It's pretty fascinating.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm on an SSRI for a very long time, and I don't want to give that up, but I would like to experiment socially or for fun with something psychedelic. I don't want it to last very long. I don't want it to last a half hour, which was one of them. Ketamine. But I've read that you can't take an SSRI and do psychedelics. Is that so?
Most people would say that's wise. And then you would have to sort of wean off of the SSRI, which can take a very long time. So I'd be careful of that. I'm glad the SSRI is working for you. It helped me years ago also, but I was able to get off of it. I was taking Lexapro, a very low dose of Lexapro. It wasn't, honestly, it wasn't that hard to get off of it, but I wasn't on it for that long. So I think that is something you do need to do with your doctor, and you may not want to risk that, because if it's working, stick with a winner. Because being in that hole of depression can be so dark and gray and, of course. I need a microphone. Who's got a mic?
Hey, thanks so much for all this information.
Are you Kevin?
Yeah.
Susan's friend. Nice to see you.
So full disclosure, I facilitate ceremonies. I've been doing it for 8 years. And I work
great. Out here?
Yeah, and I work specifically with MDMA and psilocybin. And one of the things I was going to add about
There's
MDMA...
somebody here who wants to know you, by the way.
One of the things I was going to add about MDMA...
Yes, please.
Is it creates a sense of safety.
Absolutely.
And I think what I've discovered in most ceremonies, like Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs, safety is everything. And
Everything.
so I recommend, if you're going to do this, do it with a facilitator or somebody who knows what they're doing, or assisted. These are powerful compounds, as you said.
Yeah.
And but in the right place, and MDMA is one of my favorites.
Mine too. Yeah.
With psilocybin is just the most
Beautiful.
beautiful. Yeah.
Well, you know what they used to say? They used to say, well, and I have found this to be true, it enables you to say the things you want to say that you often are afraid to say, but it also enables them to be heard with equanimity. So that's why they were so powerful with couples. Like, you know...
That's right. You had safety. I was also going to add that what happens in many ceremonies is the initial fight is you're afraid. You don't want to do this. The MDMA widens that aperture, and that sense of safety allows the psychedelic, which in my case would be psilocybin, to release itself, and then you have an ability to navigate with the psilocybin in a way that you might not without the MDMA. Yeah. But thank you so much.
That's very wise. That's very wise counsel. Thank you for sharing that. The mix of those two substances, I deal with this in the book too, is that some of these things can be combined with great results. For example, the veterans who are using them for traumatic brain injury, using ibogaine for traumatic brain injury, they'll do 1, 2, or 3 ibogaine sessions, and these are in clinics, mostly in Mexico, and they'll follow it with a DMT at the end of that round, and they say that the DMT, which is super powerful, it lasts for 20 minutes, and it's planetary, right? It's way beyond any words. They say that really enables things to come together for them. It's really fascinating.
Joe, we have time for about 2 more questions.
Well, Jeff, was that your name? Jeff, Geoff? God, see that?
Do you know my birthday too and my social security number?
Sir.
Yes. Are you familiar with the book The Tell by Amy Griffin?
No. Sorry.
Well, I bring it up because you mentioned that one of the sensations after a trip is that things are true beyond all question.
Yes.
And she wrote a book.
Oh, yes, I am familiar with it. Of course, the New York Times just wrote about it.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Could you comment on that? Because the New York Times really represented a negative perspective on her assuredness of her trip and what happened.
Well, it is questionable. So just for those of you who don't know, she is the wife of a very wealthy person in Armadillo, Texas. And she wrote a book, The Tell, that was very much publicized by Oprah and Gwyneth and all the girls. And really, she said she had a memory of abuse when she was a teenager, and she accused her high school teacher of doing this. Now, it's problematic in a small town like Armadillo because everyone was able to identify him. He is now in hiding. And it has now come out that, maybe those memories are not the case. All right? So and facilitator Kevin, you can weigh in on this here. Look, it's very possible that she came up with this, and it is not. She did have a sense that this was true, and in fact, it wasn't true. What I found curious is they don't know it wasn't true. Thank you. There's all sorts of mysteries around this, but what I found fascinating is why wouldn't she talk to the person first before signing a book contract for over $1 million? Okay?
Well, that's lunch money.
Well, exactly. But why would she take that kind of a step against another human being without having a discussion, without letting him know that she was writing this book? I mean, this man's life has been completely shattered. And I have no idea whether she's right or... Sounds like there was a bit of fabrication to the story.
So the question becomes, how significant are these memories? How true are these memories?
It's a great question. How true are the memories? one has to have that conversation with yourself, and that's why it's really important to do the integration work afterwards, so you can actually figure that out. They're not miracles. There's no miracles in this life, right? I've never found any. So I think it raises it's a great question, and it's a huge question, and I think the psychedelic movement will have to deal with this. She will have to deal with this. He is clearly dealing with this right now, the accused. I'm hesitant to blame MDMA because I believe these things should be accessible. I don't know exactly how they should be accessible, but I think we have a mental health crisis in this country. Well, obviously, especially in the people who are running the country. I think we have an addiction crisis. I think these are terrible illnesses that have no modern medical salvation, no cure. And I think these are a great opportunity to maybe change that. And I have to be supportive of that. I want to be supportive of that because it's the only chance we have right now. So I think it's a wonderful time. I think it's a wonderful problem to have come up now, and that everybody has to deal with, honestly and openly. Thanks for raising it. We're done. Goodbye. Thanks for your attention, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay, wait,
Joe.
I have one more thing to say, though. So you write a book like this, it doesn't get a lot of mainstream attention, it doesn't get a lot of reviews. I had one really good review. But please, if you read it, if you buy it on Amazon, not here with Laura, please buy it with Laura. But if you do buy it on Amazon or send it to people, please encourage them to write a review. That would be very helpful. If you read it and you like it, let's talk further. If you took a picture of this thing today, please post it. Work your social media on my behalf, and I would be very thankful for it. Thank you.